Listen, I'm happy that you guys, Secretary of State's office, is doing this and focusing on New Hampshire presidential primaries, which are important, I think, for the country, not just for the state of New Hampshire. Jonathan Martin had a recent piece in Politico about the importance of the New Hampshire primary, and he had a clever thing at the end. He said to New Hampshire people, you know, don't take yourselves too seriously and think you are owed this. You know, just be true.
Well, Joe, you and I are about the same age. We always take ourselves too seriously here in this state.
True.
Welcome back to the Secretary of State's podcast. Our special guest is Joe McQuaid, longtime editor and publisher of the Union Leader, New Hampshire Sunday News. A real staid character in New Hampshire. Probably has been on C-SPAN more than any other person in New Hampshire, except maybe Bill Gardner. But I think it's maybe a race.
It's a pretty good rivalry there.
It's interesting. You were in your early 20s when you were made editor of the New Hampshire Sunday News.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yes. I was a reporter there, and my dad had gotten sick. He was a type 1 diabetic, and he'd lost a leg, so he wasn't going in to the office on Saturday night when they actually put out the paper. So I would bring the paper home, and he would swear up one side and down the other, and I finally said, "Hey, Dad, don't yell at me. I'm not the editor." And as I'm leaving the room that night, I thought I heard him say, "Well, I can fix that too." And next week I went in and I tried to sit at my reporter's desk, and one of the editors said, "No, your father wants you to sit there."
Wow.
Yes,
Wow.
I think it was 22.
I was going to ask how.
Yeah.
And you've written several books. You wrote a book, I think, of your experiences.
Mount Washington Cog Railway, just a great place. I'm glad that for the time being they're still keeping one steam locomotive.
I was going to say, that is an interesting thing. They were going to replace it earlier, but I guess they decided to keep it for several years more. Is that correct?
I haven't followed it in specifics, but as far as I know, they'll keep one steam locomotive.
At least one.
Yeah, which is good because I think the legislature passed some bill back when EPA was just getting started, because the feds said, no more smoke, no more nothing.
I remember that.
And New Hampshire passed a law that the cog...
Special dispensation.
Exactly right, yeah. That was a great place to work. Another one of these things where I'm happy working odd jobs around Candia, and my father tells me one spring, "You're going to work at the Mount Washington Cog Railway." "Why is that, Dad?" "'Cause you love trains." I said, "Well, I love the Lionel that you got me for Christmas one year." So he and my mother packed me into their car and drive me to Mount Washington.
That's unbelievable. Well, I never met your dad, but I do know that he had a reputation of being a real tough person, very
ornery.
Yeah. And you just finished a book about him. He was
He
a
and
war
actually,
correspondent.
It's as much about my mom as my dad, because he saved all the correspondence between him and my mom when she's home in Candia, New Hampshire, raising 2 little kids and dealing with loneliness and rationing of everything.
World War II rationing.
Yep. She had to measure every room in her house so she could apply the correct square footage for the oil heat that she wanted for the winter.
Wow. Yeah. And that way, he was a war correspondent abroad during this period. Is that correct?
Yeah, for a guy who figured into a few presidential campaigns, as long as we're talking primaries, a guy named Frank Knox.
Frank Knox. You used to sit at his desk down there in Manchester, didn't you?
I have his desk in my living room.
Well, that's awesome. Explain about.
Well,
I'm a big fan of Knox.
My wife would kill me if
she knew.
If she knew, because it's blocking the picture window. Frank Knox was a buddy of Teddy Roosevelt. He rode up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt. He was a Rough Rider. After the Spanish-American War, he bought a newspaper in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, with his partner, and they were there, and he was involved with Teddy's campaigning. And in 1912, he came to New Hampshire on Teddy's behalf to talk about Teddy running against Taft, which was a big deal
That was a big
at the
deal.
time. And Charlie Bass's grandfather was the governor of the state and said to Knox, I'm in. He was a progressive. He was for Teddy. And he suggested to Knox that, well, as long as you're in New Hampshire, why don't you go to Manchester and buy that crummy newspaper, the Union. So Knox tried, and the guy wouldn't sell it to him. So Knox started the Evening Leader. Hence, the name is now Union Leader. It's a combination of the two papers. Teddy didn't win, but Knox stayed in New Hampshire, ran for governor, lost the primary to a guy named John Winant, stayed involved, was named publisher of the Chicago Daily News when the owner died. And then in 1936, Knox ran for president. He won the New Hampshire primary, I just looked up and found out, but delegates were not pledged to him. You remember the Byzantine days when the names of the candidates weren't on the ballot?
Exactly.
It was just delegates or whatever.
Yeah.
That's the only primary that Knox won. But he stayed on the ticket with Alf Landon.
Now, let me just interject something. That's an interesting scenario, but at the very same time, Styles Bridges was going to that same convention as wanting to be a favorite son for president as well. And
Makes sense.
And it ended up that he got bypassed, and then the whole delegation pushed to get Knox on the ballot for president. But the story goes that he left early after the convention. He'd lost that bid to be president, be the nominee. So on his way home, he hears on the radio that he was nominated for vice president.
Who was Bridges? Was?
Knox.
Knox.
So
Yes.
that's how he got on the ticket. But he had left early because he'd lost the nomination for president
Right.
himself.
Exactly.
And of course, Bridges was bypassed.
There was a little biography of Knox written specifically for the purpose of pushing him for president in 1936.
Yes.
Frank Knox, American. But he doesn't get it, but he's on the ticket with Alf Landon. And
They won 2 states, I think.
the saying used to be in this country, so goes Maine, so goes the nation.
Yeah.
In 1936, Will Rogers got up on the Broadway stage, tore on his lariat, and said, well, as goes Maine, so goes Vermont, because they only won those 2 states.
Those 2 states.
Knox couldn't even win New Hampshire for the
Right.
ticket.
Right.
But he was an American first, last, and always, and he lost to a guy named Roosevelt. And in 1940, Roosevelt knew there was going to be a war coming, and he wanted to have a bipartisan. Can you imagine this? A bipartisan anything?
I know, not today.
He wanted a bipartisan cabinet, and he made Knox his Secretary of the Navy.
Yeah, he's quite a guy. We have a poster at the archives about him because he's kind of a forgotten figure in New Hampshire, frankly. For one of only a couple of people who've been on a national ticket from New Hampshire when you really think about it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, where was that Salmon P. Chase guy? Where was he from?
he was from, Salmon B. Chase was from New Hampshire, wasn't he?
I think so.
Yeah.
And he was in the cabinet.
Yeah. He was a Supreme Court justice.
Exactly right. So what else do you need to know, Dean?
Well, you were a font of information. And
Well, what I don't know, I make up. And other than you and Bill Gardner, who's going to challenge me?
certainly not us. We do the same thing. It's very interesting how the New Hampshire primary has come along. And there's a guy that wrote a book back in the 60s about the television making us a global village.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because before the television, you got your news through newspapers and then later on in the radio. But when you had the television, everybody's watching the same stuff. So Marshall McLuhan, wrote this famous book and made a big deal because it was in the 60s, television had really taken on national prominence a decade earlier in the 50s. And so everybody was getting kind of the same news, the same opinions, the same entertainment. Lawrence Welk, Roy Rogers,
Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan, the fights, Saturday night fights. So everybody was kind of tuning in at the same kind of thing. And he called it was causing this nation to become kind of, in the world, a global village. So it was people had courses of that in college, and it made a big splash among the intellectual set. It seems like
Excuse me, Professor. Yes. People still get their news from newspapers. Where do you think television gets its news?
I know. But I'm leading into that. I'm leading into that, and I think you need to expand on that, because I think that needs to be said, because everybody's writing off newspapers, that the hard-nosed journalism. But what's happening, I was leading into a question for you, with the rise of social media, blogs, podcasts. Anybody with a microphone and a funny story to tell can be on every day doing a podcast. We're not quite that sophisticated yet, so we do it once a month. But there are many voices out there. And how would you size the situation up? Because we don't seem to be on the same page anymore as a nation. We're very at each other, and there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of expanded opinion that is going into the idea of being actual news.
I think it's terrible and dangerous. There are so many silos, and it's very easy to, with artificial intelligence or AI, A1, I think the Education Commissioner calls it, A1 steak sauce. But it is very easy to fool people into believing stuff that they see on their social media when half of it isn't true. There are outfits that spend their time devoted to trying to fact check these things, but they're overwhelmed. And I think it may end up in a war, a shooting war, because so much misinformation goes out, and people are so committed to one side or the other. They did that, well, we should go fight them.
But nobody's getting the same stuff. No,
very, very much so. When I was a kid growing up, in addition to reading newspapers, I watched all the network news broadcasts. I felt obligated to do so. I watched Cronkite. I watched
Peter Jennings or whatever.
No, he was a latecomer.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember who was on ABC News in the 50s.
Let's see. Howard K. Smith.
Howard K. Smith.
I have a picture in a book that I wrote on my dad in World War II. I don't have that picture in the book, but it's got a dozen news correspondents, including Howard K. Smith and my dad.
Really?
And they're dining at a table in a German guy's living room.
Wow.
The guy's name was Joseph Goebbels.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding
me. He was
me.
no longer there. And the picture on the...
you didn't put that in the book?
No, I couldn't, because I didn't have the rights to it.
Oh.
On the fireplace mantle is a picture of Adolf Hitler.
Oh my gosh.
And the GIs have slapped a kaput sign over the picture. But Howard K. Smith was on ABC for a long time.
Okay, yeah, I remember.
And Huntley and Brinkley.
Brinkley.
Yeah.
I remember watching conventions with them.
I do too,
GOP,
growing up,
Democratic.
Goldwater in '64, what's going to happen? The liberals from the East going to take over. It was crazy stuff. But good. It was good to have that information and have essentially the same information and the wire services, Associated Press and United Press, and then United Press International. And it's no longer such. It's all...
You were mentioning how the print papers, the hardworking journalists, the Kevin Landrigans, they still are viable and important.
They're vital,
I kind of cut you off a little bit to expand on what I was... But you enlarge upon that point you were making.
Well, I just think that there is a need for newspapers, because television it's all headlines and video. And if you watch the news, the evening national network news, you're going to see a lot of video, and they don't necessarily tell you until deep into the story. When was this taken? In what community was it taken? Because that does not sell eyeballs. So they'll start off the book, breaking news tonight, and we have video of this clash with the police and some suspect. When was this? Oh, it was 6 months ago.
Yeah.
But the network finally sued whatever agency it was to get the video. And since it's video, they put it on. That's important, I guess. But so important is Kevin Landrigan at the State House in Concord, New Hampshire, reporting what the legislators, the governor, even the Secretary of State's office is doing by and for the people.
Right.
He's one guy. We used to have two guys up there. I love it. Kevin Landrigan is the State House Bureau Chief. He's also all the Indians.
Is it? But what is the future? Because it is so. It's very work intensive, and it's very
Yeah, you need
time,
you
and
need bodies.
you need bodies, and you need to be able to sell papers,
and they can't afford it. The newspapers do not have the advertising streams
right.
that they've had in the past, so they can't afford as many bodies. You ask me what the future holds, I have no idea. I don't think it's good. There are newspaper deserts, they call them now,
Right.
where several places in the country in several states have no local newspaper. The Claremont Eagle Times, the last guy who tried to save it, Jay Lucas,
Yep.
thought his heart was in the right place, but it's a little community.
Yeah.
So, and the union leader just recently reported on the story of Claremont, which is an amazing story. And the business administrator has put on paid leave.
Right.
They're in the hole, the Claremont School District, for between $1 and $5 million. What are they going to do, and how did this happen, and who tells the taxpayers about this?
Right. It is definitely different. We are, you and I speaking today, come from a different generation, and we're seeing so many changes, and it just seems like there's kind of an unraveling of consensus, which you never really saw in the last few generations, because.
Well, reflect on that. In 1964, Goldwater versus the Eastern Establishment, that was a pretty contentious thing. And I want to contradict myself. There are some reasons to be optimistic about the future of the country and the information, the news information. More people have more access, as you said. There are more podcasts, etc. And as bad as that can be, if only a few people are going to be generating it, the tools are there for smart young kids in Bow High School in New Hampshire to find out about what's happening in their community and report on it themselves. And the little papers, I mentioned Bow, Chuck Douglas is the publisher of the Bow Times.
I know.
He has me to thank for that.
Really?
Well, the union leader had the rights to the Bow Times name because one of our retired editors founded the paper.
I see.
But he does a bang-up job.
That's a monthly.
What, the Bow Times?
Isn't it a monthly or bi-monthly?
I think it's a couple of times a month.
Yeah, okay, a couple times a month. You bring up Goldwater, which is a great segue into the New Hampshire primary.
Mm-hmm.
Let's revisit Goldwater. It's LBJ running for his first term, full term after the assassination in '64. And you have the rise of the conservative movement, the John Birch Society, and this very conservative kind of philosophy. You may be familiar with that yourself, having worked for a key figure in that kind of generation. But so you have a very controversial, very conservative senator from Arizona at the time, Goldwater, and they started to launch a very negative PR campaign about him being too extreme, And in fact, LBJ during the election had a warning about Goldwater's candidacy with the atom bomb going up.
Supposedly only was aired once.
Could be, but boy, I remember it.
Well, I think it got into the news cycle.
Well,
and LBJ he had a lot of the news media behind him. He had a lot of the establishment behind him.
Yes.
I was in high school at the time, and I had a social studies teacher who was just knocking the crap out of Goldwater.
Yeah. Everybody was
in class.
Everybody was. That was an interesting campaign. Rockefeller was running, I believe. He had just gotten a divorce, and so your old boss, Bill Loeb, was pounding the crap out of him.
He was
is
a
that
wife.
A proper word to use here?
Yes, a wife swapper. Loeb said that Nelson was a wife swapper.
Yes.
And the news media said, "Well, Mr. Loeb,
Yes.
you swap wives." He said, "Yeah, but I'm not running for president."
Yes, I remember that. So here we have this. He's a controversial Republican candidate. There's no doubt about it. And it's interesting that New Hampshire's primary really entered into that whole situation in a very extraordinary way.
Yeah.
In fact, we have a little film clip about that. But we'll introduce it by saying that Rockefeller was a part of that whole scenario, but you had the senior Senator Norris Cotton, and you had Stu Lamprey running the campaign for Goldwater. The backstory is we can't really get into it, but they kind of were at odds with each other during that campaign.
Yeah, when you say Lamprey, he was with Goldwater?
They were both
Wow.
co-chairs. They were both and they fought a little bit.
Yeah.
Norris Cotton was the senior U.S. senator, and he wanted to be the boss, and Lamprey was a really hands-on type of manager, and he felt he needed to do that. But anyway, that's kind of in the weeds. But we have a little interesting situation here that in the New Hampshire primary, a guy that was not even on the ballot in a write-in in the New Hampshire primary won the New Hampshire primary. Do you have that clip that we can run?
Heavy snowfall on primary day in New Hampshire is an omen of things to come. The presidential hopes of Barry Goldwater and Nelson Rockefeller snowed under by a write-in vote for Henry Cabot Lodge, the man who did no campaigning and was half a world away. Despite the weather, the turnout was heavy. 100,000 were expected to vote. Substantially more than 80,000 cast their ballots, and 35% wrote in a name, Henry Cabot Lodge. From the capital of the Granite State to the smallest hamlet on the Canadian border, the people seem to have made up their minds. Mr. Lodge's supporters had a campaign headquarters, but their efforts on behalf of their candidate were put in the shade by the whirlwind tours of Goldwater and Rockefeller. Meanwhile, Ambassador Lodge was at his post in South Vietnam as the ballots were counted. A projection of the early count showed the trend. It was a Lodge victory all the way. With the victor far from the scene of his triumph, his son George faced a barrage of questions from reporters. He said that he felt his father would remain at his post for the time being. The ambassador was at work in South Vietnam when he got the word, touring the front with Defense Secretary McNamara. As a Foreign Service officer, he could not discuss politics. But the man who emerged into national prominence as our ambassador to the United Nations may have ended the chances of Goldwater and Rockefeller.
So this is an interesting tale, because here's a guy who was in Vietnam as our U.S. ambassador to win the New Hampshire primary. What do you make of it?
I make it that the party was split, if not down the middle, at least very contentious-wise, between Rockefeller and Goldwater, the right and the left, out west and here. Wasn't there a guy named Reagan who got involved in that too?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Was he? He wasn't governor of California.
No, he gave a speech for Goldwater.
Oh, he did. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was pretty striking.
Well, philosophically pretty pretty together anyway, and kind of conservative
Yeah,
Republicanism.
yeah, and I think he really tied that whole thing together for conservatives. But the lodge thing was, okay, you could go to one, we got Rockefeller, and the people in New Hampshire said, is this all you got?
Right,
You
right.
got something better? Here's this guy from Massachusetts named Henry Cabot Lodge, and I think this really must have ticked off William Loeb, arch conservative and big Goldwater supporter. And he claimed afterwards that it was his fault because he allowed one of Lodge's supporters, who happened to be a friend of Loeb, to write a little article or put a little article in the paper about the write-in, and that's how it got known.
That's amazing. But New Hampshire, once again, being a thermometer,
Yeah.
the first in the nation,
Yep.
to actually not just kill the guy politically, but just bury him. And of course, he went on to the general election, got buried by LBJ.
This isn't even the first thermometer, Mr. Dexter. You had Kefauver up here.
In 52, yeah, running against Eisenhower.
No,
Oh no, well he was the Democratic nominee.
Kefauver was running against Harry Truman.
Oh, that's right.
And
That's right.
And
yes,
what happened was everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people on their New Hampshire surprise primary thing focuses on a later election, like the Lodge thing,
you're right. Right.
or like LBJ 4 years after Goldwater,
Right.
in which he steps aside. He stepped aside because McCarthy didn't beat him, but he almost did. And in 1952, Kefauver actually beat Truman up
Yes,
here.
he did.
And within weeks, Truman announced he was not running
Right,
for
right.
re-election.
You just jogged my memory because I seem to recall, perhaps you do too, that not only did Truman not enter the primary,
Right.
he belittled it.
Yes, he called it eyewash or something.
Eyewash,
Yeah,
right,
something.
right.
And he wasn't caught into primaries,
Yeah,
which were not a big thing until 52.
that's right.
In New Hampshire, on both sides of the ticket. The focus is always on Eisenhower beating Mr. Republican Robert Taft, and Eisenhower wasn't in the state either in 1952.
That's right.
He was
He-
running
they did-
chafe.
They didn't even know if he was a Republican or had ever voted.
Right, but it's not the first time that General Eisenhower came to Manchester and they talked politics. 1948.
Really?
He visited Manchester, gave a speech at the behest of the publisher of the Manchester Union Leader.
What?
Not Loeb. No, Loeb's partner, a guy named Leonard Finder,
Leonard Finder, forgotten figure.
a forgotten figure who then promoted Eisenhower for
Interesting.
president in 1948.
Interesting.
And Eisenhower wrote a famous letter to Mr. Finder saying, sorry, but I'm not a politician. I don't want to be president.
Does
Changed his mind a few years
the
later.
paper still have that letter?
No, I don't. The paper doesn't even have the Canuck letter, Dean.
Oh, really?
I'm so.
You're good. Now that you've mentioned, you explain the Canuck letter. You got a whole new generation here watching this program.
It's presidential primary stuff, though.
Oh yeah, well that's fine. That's what we
The
want.
Canuck letter had to do with a senator from Maine named Edmund Muskie,
I was just going to ask you that about him.
and Muskie either did or didn't cry, or his eyes got wet, in front of the Union Leader building on a Saturday before the primary, and he was upset by a couple of things, including the Canuck letter, which William Loeb and the Union Leader had run, never asked Muskie for reaction to this in advance, never checked out the validity of this letter, but said that Loeb got a letter from a couple guys who were in Florida at a Muskie campaign event at a drug rehab facility, and they went up to Mr. Muskie and said, Mr. Muskie, do you have a problem with Negroes in Maine? And Mr. Muskie told us, no, we have a problem with Canucks. Dear Mr. Loeb, could you tell us what Canucks is? And Loeb runs this with a front page editorial that says Muskie insults Canado-Americans. No evidence of that. Later on, in fact, some of the people suggested that it was a Watergate dirty trick. Muskie lost. He won the New Hampshire primary that year, 1972, but not by the amount that he should have won as the favorite and being from neighboring Maine. But you know where he got the idea for this? Appearing in front of the union leader and railing at the publisher? 1960, the night before the general election, November 1960, a park just up the street and across the street from the union leader. A guy gets up and says, "There may be a worse newspaper and a worse publisher in these United States than William Loeb and the union leader. But if there are, I can't think of them right now." His name was JFK. Crowd goes wild because he's taken on Loeb and succeeded. As a matter of fact, the paper the next day has to get Loeb's reaction to this.
That's amazing.
And Loeb says, "Geez, a guy gets upset what a little publisher in New Hampshire says. I wouldn't want him in the White House dealing with nuclear weapons." Fast forward to 1972, Muskie goes, in front of the paper, and I have to have a reporter call Loeb. And the reporter won't do it. She's scared of Loeb. So I have to call Loeb. I say, "Mr. Loeb, what do you think of this guy calling you these names in front of the paper and getting upset?" Loeb says, "He gets upset what a little newspaper publisher in New Hampshire said." Same thing. But I didn't know this because in 1960 I was 11 years old.
Well, I do remember that, of watching it on television. He actually rented a flatbed truck.
Yep.
He had a huge crowd there.
He didn't have a really huge crowd. No.
Well, see, I was watching a little TV.
It was a Saturday morning, snowy, middle of February, and he knows Loeb isn't in the building.
Right.
Loeb lived in Massachusetts.
Right.
He wasn't coming up here on a Saturday. But as a matter of fact, to get up on the flatbed truck, the aides dragged a trash can from across the street so he could step on it. And my reporter got a picture of the trash can. It was sponsored by the Association Canado-Americaine. So I ran that with a story. He doesn't like the French.
But, you know, I watched it on TV, and it was snowing.
Yep.
And I could swear that guy was crying. I could swear.
He broke down. His voice got halting and choking, mostly because of his wife. Because he said, and the news media said, that the union leader had attacked his wife. The union leader reran a very brief article from Newsweek magazine, not exactly a conservative publication at the time, in which Mrs. Muskie would get on the campaign bus with her friends and smoke cigarettes and laugh and talk. And all that Jim Finnegan, the editorial page editor of the union leader, did was have a brief preface on the editorial saying, "This woman is going to be a first lady." So this upset Muskie, and probably validly so, and that's why he choked up. But he lost.
Coming to modern times, so to speak, and we've had our past primary, the incumbent president or the president was boycotted the New Hampshire primary, and now we're entering into a new phase where we have the future ahead. What's your take on the state of the New Hampshire primary in your mind as an observer all your life, frankly, and a commentator all your life about
I think
this?
it is as important, maybe even more important than it has been in the past, and I think the Democrats will restore the presidential primary, and there'll be a lot of people running. You've already got people up here, Democrats, testing the waters, as they say, and I think it's going to be stronger than ever.
Well, it's certainly, I'll tell you one thing, we have a law that's going to make it first. Speaking of the New Hampshire primary, we could go on for a long time, but there is a big incident that happened years ago. Our audience may not be aware of it because we have new young people and people from other generations who, we're talking about old history now. It's not to us, but when President Reagan was running for president, there was a really incredible incident that happened, and you were there.
I was.
Would you explain what happened? And we have a brief video that will follow with your story.
Which story do you want?
Well, you've got a lot of stories.
I have a lot of stories about Ronald Reagan.
The incident with the microphone.
Yeah. I was asked by the National Telegraph, I was editor of the Union Leader at the time, to be one of the 3 reporters covering this event at the Nashua High School. There was only one at the time, and it was going to be between Ronald Reagan and George Bush, which by itself was confusing and disconcerting because Reagan and Bush weren't the only credible Republican candidates at the time. But the National Telegraph said they would sponsor this debate between these 2 candidates. And at the last minute, the Federal Election Commission determined that the National Telegraph could not sponsor the debate because it would be considered a campaign contribution to those 2 candidacies, which is nuts to begin with. But the Telegraph is still running the show. And we all get there, and nobody knows what's going to happen because Telegraph is not the sponsor. Reagan and Bush are going to be there. But Reagan, I think, has already sent out word that he's invited other candidates. And Telegraph says nothing doing. It's only you 2. So enter Spencer Tracy. And this is going to throw you for a loop because you expect me to talk about John Breen, who Reagan unfortunately called John Green. And Reagan was irate and emotional, spur of the moment. Breen issued an instruction to cut the microphone of Reagan, and Reagan, enraged, says, "I'm paying for this microphone, Mr. Green." Okay. Ronald Reagan was an actor, Dean. Did you know that?
Absolutely.
Okay, and he had friends in Hollywood, and a couple of them were named Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. And in 1948, Tracy and Hepburn were in a movie about a man running for president of the United States.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
And Tracy is an industrialist. He's sort of like a Wendell Willkie character, but he falls into the clutches of an evil campaign manager, Adolphe Menjou, and Angela Lansbury runs some newspapers, and she sort of likes Tracy, much to Hepburn's chagrin, and they talk him into mealy-mouthed, middle-of-the-road stuff rather than his true feelings. So the denouement of this movie is, in 1948, mind you, a television broadcast in Tracy's home. And Hepburn says, "I'll stay through this, but then I'm leaving you because you're not the valid guy anymore." So Tracy is in front of the camera, and he starts going off script and speaking from the heart, whereupon Adolphe Menjou gives the cut sign to the TV guy. And what do you think Tracy says when he sees this?
You're kidding. You're kidding.
He says, "Don't stop this. Don't shut me off. I'm paying for this broadcast."
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding.
What a great story.
Well, I also have no courage. Because I was at the White House with my reporter, John DeStazo.
Oh, I remember.
And we were about to interview Ronald Reagan, President of the United States. And he was late, and we were talking to Marlon Fitzwater, Reagan's press secretary. And I told him this story. I said, "Are you familiar with this story?" He said, "Yes." And
Really?
I said, "Has anybody ever asked the boss about this?" And he said, "No, and if I were you, kid, I wouldn't either." And I didn't have the courage to do so.
This is a good time to roll that tape.
I was still trying to negotiate to get everybody on the stage, to open it up to all the candidates. But George Bush marches up in through the door and up to the stage and sits there alone. That's my memory, and then there's sort of a pause, and people are wondering, I think, and no one quite knows what's going to happen next. Is Ronald Reagan going to go up on that stage or not? Are the other candidates going to go up on that stage or not?
To have all 7 of them there at once was, I think, not coincidence.
When did you know or finally accept the fact that all 7 were going to come out on stage?
When they walked past me onto the stage.
The first I knew that they were going to be on the stage was when I saw them coming out on the stage. Someone did ask me if chairs are going to be provided, and I said no.
They don't. The fireworks begin.
President Reagan
If we may have the first question.
wanted to make an opening statement. The statement was not provided for in the format.
To make an announcement
Would the sound man please turn Mr. Reagan's mic off for a minute?
Is this on? Mr. Green,
Would you turn that microphone
you
off,
asked for me if you would... I am paying for this microphone, Mr.
Well, you were there. You were in the front row.
3 reporters off to the side, and it was late starting, and here come Cronkite and Brinkley and Reasoner, and they're over asking me and the other 2 reporters, what's going on? What's going to happen? We have no idea what's going to happen. And when it does happen, you've seen Reagan there. And then he brings out, I don't know if it was just before his microphone moment. I think it must have been right after. He invites the other candidates, John Connolly and Robert Dole and a couple others to come out. But Breen's not having any of it. It's only going to be these 2. And that won, I think, the New Hampshire primary for Reagan. He was older at the time, not by today's standards,
Right.
but he was in his early 70s, and there was questions of, does he have the vim and vigor to go up against
Right.
the Soviets,
Right.
etc. He showed it that night, and Bush, unfortunately, showed himself to not have command of the stage, and he just sat on his hands while Reagan was running rings around.
It really was quite a moment. There's no doubt about it.
It was astonishing. Yeah, it was really great. And our deadlines for the Sunday news the next day were such that the reporter who was covering it just bat out a story about the details, what they said. So I'm reading this the next morning thinking, Loeb's not going to buy this. So I write
Yeah,
a follow-up story.
yeah.
And the phone rings. Yes, Mr. Loeb. Yes, I've got it right here. It'll be on the front page tomorrow.
You could read the man's mind. So,
Anybody should have had that story.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. What would, you've been around here and you've been at the center of this whole process most of your life. What sticks out the most in all your years?
It just that the average person gets to meet, touch, feel, poke the tires, ask people questions. You know the story about that Mo Udall would tell on himself about a barber shop. He's campaigning, I think, in Milford, and he goes into a barber shop and says, "Hi, I'm Mo Udall, and I'm running for president." And the barber says, "Yeah, we were just laughing about that." But I got another Reagan story for you.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Jerry Carmen calls me up on a Friday night.
Who was in that tape, by the way?
Correct. Jerry had been the state party chairman, and he's running Reagan's campaign in 1980. And he calls me up on a Friday night, and he says, "We have an event in Milford, and then we have an event on the seacoast, but something else has not worked out. So can you do something for us in Candia, New Hampshire?" I'm going, "Geez."
That's where you grew up, right?
Yes. "Geez, Jerry, I don't know anybody at the school." "Well, I suppose I could have a coffee at my mother's house." Now, my wife is watching me on the phone going, but he says, "That's great. All right, we'll do it. It'll be at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon." Get off the phone with him, call the newspaper, tell the newspaper, 2 paragraphs, page 3. Mrs. Margaret McQuaid, my mother, invites people in on South Road, Candia, to see Ronald Reagan. By noon on that Saturday, half the town of Candia is in the living room.
Of course.
And my wife shows up and is not happy with me because she's had to go in town, buy all the coffee and donuts to bring them out. And all she asked me to do was to dress our 2 little kids. Now 12:30, 2/3 of Candia is in the living room. No Reagan. Finally, about 1:30, Jerry Carmen calls. "We can't make it."
Ooh.
I said, "What do you mean you can't make it?" "Yeah, we're tied up. It's going to be late and it's snowing to beat the band. But put your mother on. The governor would like to talk to her. I said, Jerry, my mother doesn't want to talk to Ronald Reagan. But if you don't get Ronald Reagan in my mother's living room in half an hour, I'm going to have William Loeb endorse George Bush. Well, that wasn't going to happen. I had no right to say it, but 45 minutes later, up the street comes a big press bus, Secret Service, and Ronald Reagan comes into the living room.
What a story.
And he picks up my daughter,
Really?
the ill-dressed 2-year-old,
Yeah.
and she plants a kiss on his cheek, and Reagan says, that's a switch. The politicians usually kiss the baby.
Kiss the baby. That's great. That's great. You've had a great career, and you're writing books now, and more books. Is it 3 books you've written so far? 4?
I wrote one on the Cog Railway, one on William Loeb, a privately published one about my wife, and the latest is War Fronts, Home Fires, about my mom and my dad in World War II. He was a foreign correspondent for the Chicago Daily News, so he
Right.
worked for Frank Knox,
Yeah.
and she was home with 2 kids. And my buddy who runs a restaurant in Manchester, I brought him a copy of the book, and he looked at the cover and he said, Home fries? I love home fries. It's Home Fires, Mike.
Home Fires. Well, you were editor of the Sunday News in your early 20s.
Yep.
You were
And I was editor-in-chief.
editor-in-chief.
Yeah, and then
Then publisher.
Mrs. Loeb retired,
Right.
and she in fact died in the year 2000. She retired the year before 1999, so I became the publisher of the paper, and I had that job until 2016.
And you're president of the Nacky Loeb School.
Yes, which Mrs. Loeb started, long story. She and William Loeb tried to keep the independence of the papers, and there were various and sundry trusts, etc., and they didn't work out. But she started the school, and she said if the school has its 501c3 rating, when I die, then I'm going to give my stock to the school. So the school for a while owned a majority of the paper, but as we discussed, newspapers are having tough times. They did some refinancing, and through a couple of the trustees in the school, we found a couple of outsiders. My son found them to keep the paper running and keep it independent.
Your son is the publisher now,
Brendan J. McQuaid, yep.
Well, this has been a great time to get together. I've known you for years. I've even written some stuff for you once in a while. You've actually published it. So
I know, amazing, isn't it?
it is. So thank you so much for coming.
Dean, good for you and David and the Secretary of State's office to keep giving information to the people of the state.